subscribers asked me to talk about some of the inherent dangers of working on the tugboat, other than the obvious ones like drowning and falling overboard and fire and that sort of stuff. And, although we do have a bunch of drills and safety procedures for the obvious ones like fire and abandoning ship and all that sort of stuff, there are some other dangers that we have to deal with. One of them involves something called tripping, and it's not like a psychedelic trip by any means at all. Something that we all are very concerned about is when a tugboat gets tripped. And what tripping means is when the tugboat gets sideways and rolls over. Tugboats do very well when they're upright in the water, but when they go sideways, when they start to sink, they usually swim like rocks. They go straight down very quickly. I'm going to give you 3 different scenarios how a tugboat can be tripped. The first way that we have to worry about tripping is if we're doing ship assist. And there are tugboats that tow up and down the coast, some tugboats that do bunker work, and some boats that do assist work. Assist work is when a big ship comes in, they have to push on the side of the ship, put it to the dock, or pull it away from the dock when the ship sails. The problem where you can get in trouble as far as tripping is concerned when you're doing assist work is when the ship is coming into port. We usually wait for it to get down to a relatively safe speed. And all this depends on the boat that you're working on and the skill of the person running the boat. For me, I usually like to get the boat that I'm working on to get down to about 7 knots, 7, 8 knots, something like that. And you come alongside the ship and put up a line. The reason why we do that, the reason why I like to get it slowed down is that as the ship is coming through the water and the tugboat comes alongside, when the two come together, a Venturi effect happens between the two, and the water actually increases in speed, and so you'll come over and wiggle it over, everything's going good, then you get sucked in, there's a suction, and you slam into the side of the ship. That's not good. But anyway, once you get there, you put up a line and you run along. Now, if something were to happen, and say the ship had us backing and we're backing like this, and then for one reason or another, the line from the bow comes off and goes, if you're still moving ahead, it can roll the tug this way, or if they're backing and if the ship is backing down, it can back and roll the tug the other way, depending on how you have the line. That's not that common, but it's a possibility, and that's something that you don't like to have. Years ago, when I worked for a company that did a lot of ship work, we'd always have a fire axe up in the bow. So if you see tugboats with fire axes in the bow and it's all metal, and you say, what are they going to do? There's no wood to chop with that. The idea is that if you were in a tripping scenario, you would actually get the fire axe and the line would be made up on the bits over here, and you would go and hit the line with the axe, and the line would blow apart and hopefully free up the tugboat and you wouldn't trip. Okay, so that's one scenario. Another scenario is if you're in push gear, like the bunker work that we do, when you're pushing the barge like this, and the tug is behind like this, and you have a bow line made up here, and you have a push leg over here, and a push leg over here, and 2 safeties. Some people don't use safeties. I like to think that everyone, at least at our company, uses safeties. And what happens is, in the event that you have a loaded barge that is moving through the water at a given speed, and for one reason or another, maybe a ferry weight goes by, something happens, and you break a push leg. Say you break the forked cable. We call it the cable, but as I talked about before, it's really a synthetic line. And even if it was a cable, the cables break as well too. If that broke, suddenly you wouldn't have any control pulling you to port anymore. The starboard one would still be up, and what would happen is, at that point, it's very possible that the boat could go sideways. If you didn't have those safety lines up holding you in place, the boat would roll sideways, and if that barge is still moving at say 6 or 7 knots, as you go sideways, the pressure on the keel of the barge will pull, on the tug, will pull the tugboat down and you roll in, that starboard push cable pull on the stern and roll you right over. And that's a real concern. So the way we mitigate that risk is by having the safety lines. Some people think we use a safety line so that we can back and take way off of the barge. And of course that would help. For me, I like to have a really strong headline just so I can back on the barge and take the way off the barge before we do anything else. And those two safety lines are basically just to hold me in back of the barge so that I don't get off to the side into a tripping scenario. And then the third way that I want to talk about tripping is when you're on the wire. You're towing up and down the beach. When we say the beach, that means that you're going offshore. And somehow, some reason, whatever the reason might be, something goes wrong. Let's say that you have a engine failure, or maybe you have a steering failure. Whatever it is, you're towing like this, and the barge is like this, and if you stop, the barge isn't going to stop. The tugboat will stop, and the barge will keep going. And if the barge goes by you, that line is going to pull from the stern and roll the tugboat right over. Another scenario would be if you're going along like this and you have an autopilot failure. Most times when autopilots fail, at least it's been in my experience, autopilots usually don't fail and just stop working. They usually go hard over one way or the other. So you're cruising along, everything's fine, and all of a sudden it pulls a crazy Ivan and starts turning real hard this way. If the person doesn't react fast enough, you can get way out over here and the barge is still going this way. When that line comes tight, it's going to try to roll you as well. So that's what tripping is. It's something that we're very concerned about, and we try to do everything we can to make sure that we never get into a situation that would allow that to happen. The next thing that we talk about is, or I should say the next thing, another problem unfortunately has happened to somebody that used to work for a company that I worked for, and then they went and worked for a company up in Maine, and unfortunately they got killed, and it's getting pinched by the wire. When I say pinched by the wire, what that means is that the wire was going over the side. Now, I wasn't there, but this is how I've heard the story been told to me, that somebody was working on the wire, breaking down or making up, I'm not really sure. Remember, the weight of the wire, the fish plate, and the whole bridle, it's a whole lot of weight. It could be a ton, maybe even more than a ton of pressure on the wire. Anyway, somebody got into a jam, and another deckhand jumped in, pulled that person out, and in doing that, they put themselves between the rail of the tugboat and the wire moved and cut, and hit them right up against the rail like this. And it's a horrible thing. And unfortunately, for that guy, apparently, by the time he was good until they removed the wire, and at that point he was all done. When they released the wire, everything was done. So the wire is a very dangerous thing. Now, I've heard something that I don't know if it's true or not, and I've always wanted to talk to some physicist, give them some numbers, and have them tell me how it all works. But while we're towing, and say you're towing a loaded 50, and you've got a 2.5-inch cable, and it's going across through the donut and over the side, and out 1,200 feet, 1,500 feet to your barge, towing up and down the coast. You got 4,000 horsepower pulling on this big heavy weight, and everything's fine. But even so, it's not uncommon for that donut with the wire going through it to jump here and jump there and jump back and forth. A few people have told me that there's so much energy built up in that wire that little jump back and forth, it's deceiving, and that if someone were to walk by that wire and that wire just touched their head, because there's so much energy built up in that you can instantly crush a skull just by having it move a few inches. And as odd as that sounds, I like to think of this in terms of something that I saw on one of the NASA shows on one of the Discovery channels or something like that. And they said that a grain of sand moving 17,000 miles an hour up in space has the kinetic energy of a .44 Magnum shot at point blank. So you can have really small things moving a lot of fast that carry a lot of energy, or very big things moving very slow, and they still carry the same amount of energy. And so that's the thing that I've always wondered about. Like I say, I've heard that this is true. I've never witnessed it, and I hope I never do. But when that wire jumps back and forth, say 6 inches, 4 inches, whatever it is, obviously we tell everyone on deck that the wire equals death, and you stay away from the wire, and you never step over the wire. You walk around the winch, and you do all that sort of stuff. But I've always wondered about that, and that's something that maybe you guys can comment about maybe you can tell me your thoughts about it in the comments. But anyway, that's just a quick rundown of some of the things that we worry about on a tugboat. Thank you again for watching, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. My channel's doing really well, and I really appreciate all you guys out there. Really appreciate all the comments that you've been doing. Really kind of cool. Thanks, guys.